media with the AHDB Talking Leaders with the fantastic Melanie Siggs and that equally fantastic Isaac from the AHDB. We're just waiting for the for all the social media to kick in. Melanie, I sort of preempted this before in our little green room. Groundswell. There's a bigger event that Isaac attended with his colleagues at the AHDB. When was it, Isaac? A couple of weeks ago? Was it last?
Yeah, couple of weeks. Yeah.
A couple of weeks ago. And one of the main speakers is Henry Dimbleby, the author behind the behind our food plan. And I asked him on slightly ad hoc when I captured him with my little camera, said, did he have any regrets as to the food strategy? And he said, I wish we concentrated more on the oceans. And that resonated with yourself. What's your sort of takeaway that the author of the food strategy wished that he'd concentrated more on the oceans? What's your view of that, please?
Well, as a born optimist, I'm actually quite conflicted by my reaction to that, because I'm thrilled that he realizes that he perhaps could and should have done more on it, and I hope that that's not a lost opportunity, and that means that we can continue to do that. But I would remind him also, I remember years and years ago, just after Brexit, we started this conversation around the UK food system and what we could do, and I sat in on these meetings and I said, when are we going to talk about fish? And they said, oh, I don't know, because it's really complicated.
Really? Wow.
That's the reason not to talk about it, was it?
But Melanie, that's why we need experts like yourself. Right, team. All the lights are green across all the social media. Hello, my name is Max McGillivray from Beanstalk Global. Pleasure to be here with you today on the AHDB Talking Leaders series with my esteemed colleague Isaac. Isaac, take us away. Introduce yourself, AHDB, and then introduce Melanie. And just for those people dialed in on the podcast, I'll just give a little bit of background for Melanie. Melanie, it's like this long, your background. I don't know. I don't know how we're going to get it into 2 hours.
You'll have to get very quick to introduce all of Melanie. But hi all, and I'm Isaac van Heerden. I work for AHDB. So if you're dialing in from the fish world or from anywhere in the world, and AHDB, the Agriculture and Horticultural Development Board, is the UK body and levy body, and we work on behalf of farmers. The part that I work in is called AgriLeader, and in that, and we try and help farmers on their leadership, on their people management skills. We've got a raft of resources. We do send this Talking Leaders every month, and getting people from inside and outside of agriculture to come and talk and see what we can learn from each other. The whole idea behind AgriLeader is to help farmers better recruit, better retain their peoples, and leaving them better managers of people and concentrating on the business rather than on finding new people. So that's kind of the remit of AgriLeader. But as AHDB, we do some various other things. We do business insights, helping to make better decisions on farm. We do a lot of marketing in both domestic and international markets, helping to open up markets. We do knowledge exchange on farm, and we also do work on the environment, things like baselining farms and looking at how that works. So a wide array of work that we do in AHDB. I was lucky enough to get invited to speak at the Fisheries Innovation and Sustainability event, and this lady came onto the stage and absolutely blew us away, and said, and had to get her onto Talking Leaders, and that's how I met Melanie.
Excellent. And Melanie, it's actually quite interesting when you look at the three of us. Melanie, you got a lovely ocean behind you. I've got the mountains behind you. One of our mutual friends, Isaac, has already dialed in to ask, are you in the fens? So Isaac, where? So everyone on the podcast, Isaac is sat out in, I'm guessing it's in your garden or something similar, and he's got this. Melanie, you describe, Melanie, the vista behind Isaac, please. You'll describe it far better than me.
Definitely. Well, because part of the reason. So Isaac and I are not that far from each other. We both live in East Sussex, and I'm in his part of the world very regularly, and I love that view. And we were just chatting a little bit, as you say, in the green room before. And number one, I love a horizon, and that is a fantastic horizon. Number two, it kind of demonstrates the significant afforestation and hedges of East Sussex.
Yeah.
And number three, I think it's always amazing because if people think about the southeast of England, they think about it being very overpopulated. And we have these kind of tight conurbations of population and then these beautiful open green views that Isaac is so beautifully illustrating behind him.
Yeah, and Melanie, I love the way you smile when you talk about that that vista. There's obviously a lot of passion in you in the respect of what you do, which we're going to find out now. So just for the sake of the people on the podcast, and the July episode of Talking Leaders, as Isaac has very kindly stated, we're joined by Melanie. Melanie is Director of Strategic Engagements at the Global Seafood Alliance for a conversation on the synergies between blue food systems, agriculture and forestry, and how they must work together to drive responsible food production. Melanie holds a number of positions, allowing her to work globally across policy, private sector, science and academia. Strategic Engagement Director, Global Seafood Alliance, Chair of Fisheries, Innovation, Sustainability. Going over to my next page, Melanie. A non-executive director of CEFAS, UK HMG Marine Science Agency, ambassador to the Iceland Ocean Cluster, and honorary professor at Heriot-Watt University. So Melanie, where I'm really excited about you being on, and we found this so many times before with this series, is that I don't think Isaac can really say it, but perhaps I can. Within farming, we can be quite myopic. And we find, and especially with what the gentlemen do and their colleagues within AgriLeader, if we can bring people like you in that have not so much worldly wise, but just look at things from a different sector, we can learn from you and adapt ourselves to be better within our systems. So Melanie, question of you: do you think that your sector that you're in per se is it quite a sophisticated sector compared to agriculture? What do you think?
No.
Shock.
It has such a legacy and such a history, and I'm going to talk predominantly from a UK lens because you know, I feel that that's appropriate. But this is a super global industry, very much split into two halves. The wild capture side, picture of the ocean behind me there, wild capture fish coming from the ocean, and some freshwater systems too. But then the farm side of aquaculture as well. And globally, we now eat more farmed seafood than we do wild caught seafood. And both of those, possibly the farm side, even though actually it goes, we keep thinking of it as a new sector, but it isn't. It goes back a long, long time. But there is possibly a little bit more science coming in, a little bit more sophistication, to use your word, in the kind of management and techniques and things like that. But I think that would almost be on a par with agriculture. Fishing, you know, it's the last wild hunted food commodity and just sits a little bit more in history. But we have a lot of work going on to improve the way that we fish and we manage and the data we collect and what we do on board and all those sort of things. But I don't think that we're ahead of the case. I think we're in a different space, basically.
Okay. And the connection between Melanie and the fish sector? Talk us through that journey.
Yes, because you've worked in farming and forestry as well. So yes, and give us a little bit of a history of there.
I am, as I think we've established since the beginning of this, quite old, you know. I've got quite a career behind me, and I you know, or working years, shall we say, behind me, and I've been very fortunate that I've been able to follow my heart through most of that, and my heart very clearly lies in agriculture and food and natural capital systems, those kind of things. So I started out in agriculture more. I actually wanted to be a vet or a show jumper, just FYI, but you know, stuff happens. And I ended up working in agriculture, but very much on sort of policy side, looking at what was then the Common Agricultural Policy in Brussels, ran the European Agricultural Outlook Conference, did a lot of work on those aspects of agriculture, and got contracted. I was working for a company called AgriEurope, and I'll mention it only because I'm sure that there'll be some people watching this who'll remember AgriEurope. And we got contracted by UNFAO to do some work on seafood, and I took on that contract. And most of my colleagues in seafood will tell you that it has some kind of addictive quality, that once you've worked in it, it's very difficult to escape. So I worked with FAO on seafood. I married a farmer. sort of background and blood. There's a lot of farming blood in me and a lot of farming friends. So it's very experiential, my hands-on farming experience. And I had the opportunity to go back to school and do another master's degree, which I did it was in business and responsibility. So we'll park that there just for a moment. In between all that, I just want to mention one thing, and that is that I came out of this natural capital space and I worked in insurance, and I wasn't quite sure why I was doing that. There were lots of kind of personal reasons why I ended up doing that. But what it taught me was the business of risk and risk analyses and kind of measuring risk. And I found that enormously helpful in all of this work. And I encourage people to think about that, understanding risk as a component of these systems. So I did that master's degree, and did I mention the 10 years in forestry in between? Don't think I did.
No.
Yeah, that was between the fish and the master's degree. Worked for the arguably the world's biggest forest products company, who are based out of Finland, UPM Kymmene, and so huge forest interests, and also industry paper, which uses huge amounts of water and energy and is very embedded into the recovery and recycling and circular economy. So you're seeing a bit of a theme of how my intellect and my heart was sort of moving towards these spaces. Absolutely loved working in forestry. Did this master's degree, trying to speed up here, and got an opportunity to move back into the world of seafood, which had continued to fascinate me. And interestingly, I decided to take all the commercial experience and put it into the NGO world and see how we could better partner with the private sector, which 20 years ago wasn't really happening, certainly in seafood. So that's me in a slightly big nutshell.
Well, so you've worked across all of those three sectors, and when we had a chat previously, we talked about all three of those are kind of stewards of the land, stewards of the earth. How do you see in that, and how do we really lean into that and to make sure the consumer, whatever it is that we produce, see those sectors as such?
Yeah, I mean, there are kind of two parts to that question. One is this stewardship approach, and I use that term because we do tend to we might not even articulate it, but we sort of behave like we own this bit of whatever it is that we're managing and dealing and producing our food from, or driving through, or looking at, or whatever those things are. We own it very often if it's land, those sort of things. And yet the reality is we are just stewards of that space for a period of time as we kind of pass through. It's often said, no one's going to save the planet, which I admit is a term that always sort of rubs me up the wrong way. We need to save the planet. If we all disappeared off the planet, it will be fine. It will regenerate into whatever it needs to be, what it wants to be. Some things will die, some things will prosper, all sorts of stuff will happen, but we won't be here to either impact or be impacted by that. Right now, we are, probably the most influential species. We are the most influential species on the planet, and we act as stewards of all of those spaces as we pass them on to the next generation and the next generation, whether that's forestry or land or oceans. Do we need to share all of that with consumers? I controversially sort of suggest that it's way too much. I mean, we are consumers, and I often like to think about our own behavior when we go and buy something, typically go to the supermarket or the small or the farm shop or wherever it is we go. Because we know quite a lot and we're sort of working with it on a day-to-day basis, we might think more about how whatever it is was produced and its impact and my responsibility and my role. And then we'll probably think about price, because that's going to be a big influence. And then we might think a little bit about, oh gosh, and what about the people who, and by then, I've spent 10 minutes looking at the coffee, or I've spent, 15 minutes looking at the menu, and my friends have got bored waiting for me. And at some point, I just have to move on and make a decision. I think that we have to be very realistic about how much shoppers, consumers, and co can absorb. And I think a lot of that responsibility is and should be big word, taken on by, you know, the brand, the retailer, the food service outlet, the farmer, the fisher, you know, the people who are responsible for making that happen. And in a lot of cases, and I include myself, we make these preliminary decisions about where we buy things from and where we eat and what we do, based on our trust of whether we think they're doing things properly, responsibly.
Do you think the food system's broken?
I'm not very keen on closed questions. So I'm going to answer no, because there might be some wobbles. Was it ever right and fixed? Is there a place that's right and fixed? I would suggest not. It's just constantly evolving and changing and adapting. We're learning and we're trying to feed more and more people, and we understand more about the role of food to us, our impact on the planet in producing it, what works, what doesn't work. So I don't think the food system is broken. I think sometimes the fact that we know so much makes it quite confusing. But I heard a lovely thing, which you've probably heard before, but it's worth repeating, as they say. We arguably, in a country like the UK, we sort of take food for granted a little bit. We really do, and we expect to be able to afford it, and we take it for granted. And yet, oh God, I'm trying to remember who said it, but we are only arguably 9 meals always from anarchy.
Yeah.
And I think that is really worth remembering, because it kind of focuses the mind on how we make decisions about the food we buy and eat and our relationship with it. 9 meals from anarchy. I think it's true. And if you look at the beginning of COVID, arguably 9 toilet rolls from anarchy.
You mentioned there about trust, and and the consumer wants to put their trust in the supermarkets, in the supply chain, and I guess part of that is transparency. To sort of counter what Max's question was, what does good actually look like then in the food service? What does a good supply chain look like? And you say, does the consumer care? And should they care? Is it too much? How do we make that a meaningful vision for them without overwhelming them, without it being too much?
And for ourselves, I mean, we're earning a living doing this and helping retailers and others and producers to do it well. But I just remind us, we are also consumers and shoppers, and who can be easily overwhelmed, as I frequently am, trying to make decisions on things. So I also heard you say in there something like, did you say something like consumers don't need to be or shouldn't be expected?
We don't want to overwhelm them with too much information.
Yes. Only because I think that they should be very aware, right? All of us should be very aware. And I would suggest that for a lot of people, they aren't very aware of how their food is produced and where it's coming from, whatever it is, and whatever part of the world it's coming from, and all those sort of things, until arguably it makes a headline in the news. But I think having that level of awareness, and then understanding where you're buying from and whether there's a level of trust there. So what does transparency look like? So if I do want to know something, a menu, I'm going to pick a menu because we actually have a relatively small number of retailers in the UK, and it doesn't take you long to get a bit of a handle on them and to look at their sourcing policies if things like that are of interest to you, and to understand where you want to go. And they have quite different price points and all sorts of things. So we can make our decisions relatively easily within the UK. If we think about restaurants, which is quite different, and we look at menus, and so if I get invited out for dinner, which clearly because of this I don't very often, but I will very often go to the website and I'll have a look at the menu in advance to think about, I wonder how does it feel? I wonder where they're getting their food from. Do they claim any provenance about anything? Do I feel like they care about where this food is coming from? And if they do claim provenance, do I believe it? Do I trust it? Does it use language that makes me understand all of these things? And that is a very base level of transparency, if you like. So at that point, you're not digging into real deep you know, what standards they use and what that means and what metrics are covered and the science that underpins that and all those things, which we might do in our professional lives. But I think that base level of transparency is important. And I can illustrate it a little bit with so I'm looking at the moment, this isn't food, but it comes from food production. So collagen, if you've heard about collagen, it can be both bovine collagen coming from cattle, or marine collagen coming from the sea. Collagen markets are doing this. Everybody wants collagen. You can drink it, you can eat it, you can slap it on your face, do all those sort of things. It's a building block of skin and joints and so forth. But the transparency around its sourcing is really, really minimal right now. It's kind of where we might have been with seafood 25 years ago, and possibly with some agriculture commodities even longer ago than that. Certainly forestry longer ago than that. And I find it quite fascinating and alarming. And so I spoke to this collagen company and said, oh, marine collagen, where's it coming from? Oh, it's all wild. It's all wild farmed fish. So already I'm like, okay. And I feel a little bit mean because they don't know that I know quite a lot about this. And then next minute, you know, it's from a fish called Pangasius out of Brazil, you know, and you start to build this picture. They are not meaning to lie to me. They are basically quite ignorant of the whole process. They're buying an ingredient and using it. And they use, oh, and I was assured that no dolphins had died.
Oh, no.
Right? So you get my point, don't you? So I think transparency is lots of layers. And for them personally, they weren't getting the right level of transparency from their supplier. And then they weren't able to pass on any meaningful transparency at all to anybody who might be interested buying their product. Whereas in direct food consumption, certainly in the UK, we do have reasonable levels of transparency that we are pressing to be better and better through things like, you know, digital, I can't get my words out now, traceability, all the time, and to really fully understand where our food's coming from and where it's been through en route to us and so forth. But there are still many, many products out there that are related to our industries that don't have that. Not time to get complacent yet.
Excellent. Have you got one, Max?
Melanie, I'm just trying to think of the seatbelt analogy, and bear with me on this one. That when the seatbelt ban law came in, everyone was saying, "Why am I going to wear a seatbelt? It's against my rights." But we all then quickly adopted it. This talk about trying to create societal change by getting the consumer to criticize the restaurant or the retailer, when actually it should be the producer that should be putting on the seatbelt. If you can see my analogy, do you think with the likes of the accreditation schemes that we have in the UK, with the likes of say Red Tractor or Leaf or B Corp, do you think that we're seeing more suppliers in your sectors doing the decent thing because they know they've got to do good? Okay,
so that I'm not convinced by your analogy there. I thought you were going down a different route with that, honestly. I thought you were going down the route of sometimes you need to have that regulatory change,
okay,
to get a shift in behavioural change. But if we're talking about standards and Red Tractor and Leaf and all those things, what I can talk about with greater intelligence, arguably, are the standards in seafood or even in forestry. So these standards, I'm actually a huge fan of standards, and I'm so embarrassed by that because they're so kind of mechanistic and linear, but they underpin everything we do. So if we want to produce trees or cattle or sheep or soy or potatoes or fish or whatever it is, and we want to do it well, we want to do it responsibly, the first thing we have to arguably do is all agree what that means.
Yeah, well done, thank you.
And that is essentially what a standard does for us, whatever those are. And it's our flag. I use this analogy, and I think I mentioned this to you, Isaac. You know, take a 1,000-piece jigsaw and tip it out on the table, and the first thing you do is you're going to find your corner pieces. or like 99.9% of people are going to find the corner pieces. And for me, one of those corner pieces are our standards in these commodities. But it is imperative that they are created transparently, to use that word again, so people understand the methodology to create them. They're underpinned with science. They're regularly kind of addressed, and new things are brought to bear on them. And those new things might be learning from data from the third-party audits that are done on them. It might be learning from new science that's arrived, whatever those things are. Or, to be brutal, in the world of seafood, we were very, very environmental focused. And then the business of human rights and labour started bubbling up more and more and more. Now, in hindsight, it's very easy to go, why on earth weren't you thinking about that before? And we kind of were in a small way, but we hadn't addressed it in a big way. So you have to constantly be revisiting those standards. And again, that's part of their role. So transparently done, underpinned by science, public consultations, expert groups. You know, there's a whole suite of things that standards need to make them quality and rigorous, and they underpin what we do. Now, I can say that the principal standards in seafood, ASC, BAP, MSC, Global Gap, you know, those are all good, rigorous standards. I can't say that about agriculture because I don't know them well enough. FSC is certainly in that bracket. They all get beaten up a lot because not
they do.
all of them, but you got to stand by it. And we have a lot of people who are embracing that, to answer the second part of your question, in seafood. So two things. In the UK, I think I'm right in saying that all of the UK supermarkets have as their first port of call in sourcing seafood, certified seafoods to one of those that I've just mentioned as their first requirement. There won't be enough seafood that's certified to meet that. And so then you start getting into these different realms around improvement projects and all sorts of things in the next categories. But yeah, I think standards are important.
With standards, and I 100% agree with what you've said there. But where do you find that balance? Because standards are quite rigorous, by nature they need to be. But how do you apply them sensibly in dynamic systems like in farming, where the weather changes, and it's a biological system, and even more so in sea fisheries, the things can change within minutes of each other. So how do you apply those standards? How do you find a sensible way to work that?
Yeah, you're right. And it is a challenge. We have seen fish stocks, which because of arguably because of climate change and the changing kind of physiology in the ocean, those fish stocks then move. Unbeknown to them, they've moved into a different jurisdiction, which manages fish differently. And they were certified, and now they're not certified. A whole different type of complexity altogether. And what that does is also it makes the whole system wobble as about trust in standards and science and all sorts of things. It's a very difficult thing to manage. However, so jurisdictions aside, because that's a huge one, although typically countries can work together on these things. But I think you're right. And I've talked about this a few times before. I don't think we're ready for this, but I think that we do have to work out, and it may not be standards only. I think it's also fisheries management generally. We've got to work out how to manage dynamic systems. And probably because they seem to be changing quite quickly, to not always be managing them based on history. Now, clearly, you're going to have to do it to a degree on history because it's about what you've learned and what you've experienced. But I don't know. Is there a way where, let's say, fishermen are out on the ocean and they're certified or they're working within the regulations and everything, but actually what they're experiencing in their fishing activity is not what was expected? It's not what, I mean, that happens a lot fishing, but for different reasons. The stocks that were supposed to be there or different stocks have come in of a species that were unexpected. Whatever it is, these things can happen. And should it be that they can have like a system whereby they, I don't know, they can dynamically buy quota quickly, or they can have like a yellow card to take a suite of decisions in the moment to enable them to still, you know, be able to fish productively. How do we, and I think this is a conversation that we've got to have, and perhaps have in farming as well, how do we allow appropriate but more dynamic decisions to be made by the farmers and fishers and producers of these food systems in this very fast changing environments that we have?
Melanie, data. There's so much conversation that goes on within agriculture about data. At Groundswell, the regenerative event we were talking about, there's another data platform that's just been launched. What's your insight on data within your sector of seafood and forestry? Because you sort of alluded to it earlier. Are you? So I'm going to go for that closed question again. Are you a fan of data, or is it a hindrance, or is it going to be beneficial to us?
Oh, I'll go for a closed answer. Yeah, I'm a fan of data. I mean, what can you do without data, right? So there's the starting point. You've got to have data. And so data historically has been quite expensive to collect and all those sort of things. It is getting a lot cheaper to collect. I don't like the word cheap, but a lot more affordable, shall we say, to collect. And I think we have very, very little excuse not to have the data that we need nowadays to make good decisions. I think that there are three big things on the table right now, and they'll probably change tomorrow, and they were different yesterday, but I'll go with the three which I think are right in front of me right now in terms of data. One is that we can collect huge amounts of it now. So what should we just collect whatever we can and like put it in the buckets and see what we need later? Number two is, what do we do with that data, as in interrogating it? What questions do we need to be asked? And that's you know, quite a challenge in itself. What do we not know? And then we've got AI, you know,
Yeah, well done.
to play now, and its ability to interrogate that data, and how far do we trust that? How is it learning? How do we help it adapt and learn it appropriately? So yeah, in fisheries, I was at a fisheries conference 2 weeks ago, and I would say that every presentation over 2 days at least touched on data, if not focused on it. But yeah, we can collect huge amounts of data, and that's a joyous thing, and we should probably do that. Oh, and one final thing. Is this 5 things on the table? Maybe. But who owns the data, right?
Yeah.
And that's always a big one too.
Yeah.
But if you,
just to jump in there very quickly, that is something that AHDB is looking in, working with stakeholders and looking at, you know, and how do farmers get that value back, and, you know, creating the data they should be, so looking at the custodianship of that data. So, you know, that's something else that we do on behalf of levy payers to make sure, you know, so it doesn't just go into the ether and there's no value extracted from it, and, you know, somebody else owning your data. So that, just sort of aware of time, Max, and I really want to touch on the next bit, because the first time I heard you speak, Melanie said,
I'm really mindful. There's an awful lot of interference on your microphone.
Yeah. So just everyone on the podcast, because Isaac's outside, and he's got a very special mic. If Isaac, if you you know what, it's a bit like Control Alt Delete on your computer. If you just pull your mic connection out and put it back in again, it should make it less scratchy. Whilst Isaac's doing that, Melanie, when you talk about AI at conferences 2 years ago, was everyone in your world talking about sustainability, and now 2 years on, we're all talking about AI?
Oh no, I think we're still talking about sustainability.
Okay.
Yeah, no, definitely. Sustainability is still right up there. I think what has changed when we talk about sustainability is our scope. And you know, we even have that coming into policy now. So if we think about things like the One Health approach, you know, and thinking about actually that's a joining of different systems and different aspects of sustainability, you know, like health, like farming, like, you know, economies, all those different things coming into one, health and environment and agriculture and wildlife and biodiversity coming into those systems. So I think it's more our scope and the edges of the term sustainability. You keep making me repeat that word, don't you?
Sorry.
that are changing. Whereas I think AI, for most of us, is still quite new and a little bit scary. And if you're an optimist like me, you just like to think it means that all things are possible, which is one of my mantras in life.
Yep. And we'll just should we just do a quick sound check on Isaac? Isaac, just turn your sound back on, please, for those good people on the podcast.
Let's see. Is that any better?
It's brilliant. He's back in. Carry on, Isaac, as you were. Go, Isaac.
Yeah, can you hear me? Is that better?
We can. Carry on.
Excellent. Right. I was going to say, so we can talk about this for ages, but Melanie, the first time I heard you speak was at the FIS event, and we've got a saying in farming about, and you can use everything of a pig apart from the squeal, but so you were talking there about initiatives like 100% fish and 100% shrimp, I think, originating in Iceland. And Max, it's just amazing the and how fish are being utilized. So take it away, Melanie.
Yeah, because that's one of my favorite topics. So it's a little bit like saying that human rights, the narrative around that has got so much bigger, rightly so, in seafood in the last few years. Well, it's very easy to look back and wonder how we ever think it's appropriate to waste anything. Why would we take a fish out the ocean or produce fish in a pond or anything else and then waste any of it? Not only because of the money and effort and time we've put into it, but also from an ethical and moral perspective too. So Iceland kind of led the way in this in seafood from about 13 years ago. Iceland very dependent, on its cod fisheries. It's just inherently a fishing nation, and a chap over there, Thor Sigfusson, who's a sort of serial entrepreneur and very smart guy, just noticed that there were large parts of these cods that were not used. So the fishery was sustainable and certified and quota driven and all those kind of things. So there's nothing wrong with it as such. But he just noticed there was a lot of things not getting used from those fish. Very typically from a cod, you're taking your high value fillets and sending them off wherever they needed to go. And so he started to explore that. And if we just fast forward 13 years, the Iceland Ocean Cluster is a sort of entrepreneurial group who use those parts of those cods, and that has led to lots of things. So, for example, there is now we talked about collagen a little bit earlier. There is a soda drink called Collab. In fact, I should have bought one. I've got one in the kitchen. I'll go and get it. But which is now the #1 soda drink in Iceland. And when you walk through the airport, there's big adverts up for
Fantastic.
it. It's a soda drink with collagen in it. So that's that was a brand new product. And then there are other collagen products like the face creams or whatever, where people have taken it and developed that. You can, of course, put it into fish meal, which we need more and more fish meal because we need to produce more and more aquaculture, and it also goes into other animal feeds as well. And it's quite controversial. So, in fact, of something, I think it's over 51% now of fish meal is being produced from trimmings and so forth. So-called secondary products from fish. So and that has traditionally been seen as a kind of low value place for that fish to go. However, because we're making more demands on traceability and quality and so forth around that, it is really and because it's so in demand, it has a much higher value on all senses now, and is not looked down upon. But the unicorn in all of this was a wound dressing, which is now licensed and used in the US in a number of hospitals over there. And you can find it online. It's a company called Kerasis, and you'll find YouTube videos of this amazing wound dressing, which heals things like very chronic ulcers on legs or
brilliant.
Yeah. So fantastic. And it means that one cod might be worth as much as $5,000 now. And this is what sits behind 100% fish. But to put that in context, Kerecis use about 1 day's worth of cod skins from that production. And in shrimp, we're looking at that. The rest of the world call them shrimp. We call them prawns. But it is the most highly traded animal protein on the planet. I always love sharing that fact. And it's produced all over the world, farmed, this is. There are also wild caught shrimp as well. It's a very popular seafood. And a lot of investment is put into it in South America. It's able to be farmed by lots and lots of smallholders in India, Indonesia, for example. So it's very important. But if you think about most of the shrimp that you see in the cabinets of your retailers, they probably haven't got a head or they haven't got a shell on them. In other words, that shell and head has been taken off. And so 100% shrimp is looking avidly at how much there is around the world and what you can do with that. And trust me, what you can do with it is staggering. It acts as a biopesticide. We turn it into chitosan, and it acts as a biopesticide, a biostimulant. Addresses diseases in vineyards and trees and all sorts of things. So as you can hear, I get very excited about this. And if we want to do a podcast on what to do with your leftover bits of fish, we could probably do that. But it's still relatively new. And I say relatively because if you went to a low-income country, they probably use like all of their fish anyway. It's a different framing. But in high value markets where we tend to want just fillets and peeled shrimps and things like that, we were leaving a lot of residual material behind. And now we're really addressing that, which is great.
Can I give you a quick example, but both of you, that I actually think we give ourselves a hard time within forestry, within the fish sector and agriculture. My son recently bought some desk equipment from IKEA, and we went to a regional distribution depot up in East Anglia to pick it up. And when we went there, I was amazed to see that we drove into this big industrial yard. There was about 100 running machines all stacked up. And I said to the guy who was helping us, what are those all about? And he stated, well, you know that, and I won't name them, that training company that you sign up to and you can train online. And as part of the subscription, you get a running machine and a bicycle sent to your house. Well, all of these are for people that haven't renewed their subscription after a 3-month trial. So they've had a running machine and a bicycle sent to them. They've decided not to continue with it. It's gone back into the system, back to this depot. It can't go to another consumer because of legal issues. So they're going to landfill. So there was 100 running machines and 200 bikes in this warehouse about to be crushed to go into landfill. And you think of all the energy, plastic, engineering, motors that are gone, and they could be recycled or even go to be used overseas. And that was all because of that legal side. And we beat ourselves up in the ag and the fishery sector about not using that last 2% when we got ridiculous examples like that. Just thought I'd say. Isaac, over to you. Oh, sorry,
yeah,
Melanie.
Max, you've ruined my day telling me that story. I mean, I'm feeling enraged, and it's one of those occasions where I always wish I didn't have to actually earn a living because there are so many things that I'd just like to go and do something about.
Yeah. I wanted to take a photo, but rightly so, the chap didn't want us to because it's not to be known. That happens behind the curtains. That sort of way. So Isaac.
But the whole story there around some the change in fish and how every bit of value is extracted from that. That's just amazing. Do you think there might be a time where the fillets and the shrimp and the some steaks become the secondary income, and things like the fish skins is actually the higher value part of the fish, and some similar for agriculture? What can agriculture learn from that? I know we do use a lot of the animal, but and how do we create those markets for it?
Okay, a lot to unpack there, but I think, so to answer the very first part of that, yes. I mean, we're starting to see that a little bit where what we thought were secondary products. So yes, a secondary product can overtake and become the primary product. And I play with the idea that one day people will be going like, oh yeah, I make chitosan, and the amazing thing is you can actually eat the shrimp as well, right? Because chitosan has just so many applications. You could see that happening, right? It's not going to happen with the greatest will in the world in our lifetime. but I wouldn't be surprised. And I think the same with the fish skin. That's happening with cod. There's a fish called tilapia, which is you can farm tilapia. It's pretty simple, and there's a big drive to increase the farming of tilapia in Africa, and the skin of tilapia works even better, according to papers that I have read, as a wound dressing than cod does. And so imagine if actually these farms in Africa that are producing tilapia end up producing wound dressings as their primary high value product, and happy days, they get to eat the fish as well, right? So I can see those things happening in my little fantasy world, but I remind you that I believe that all things are possible. You asked me what I think farming can learn from that, and I'm not sure, because we kind of think that farming's been doing this full utilization. It has, in my experience. Although I find myself, every time I say that, I want to remind us of how little wool is worth. I used to have a lot of sheep, and it breaks my heart how little wool is worth financially, and we need to do something about that. Because I think that is actually quite a good example of where that's just completely turned around. That was a very valuable product. So these things just change places the whole time.
Yep.
And if you're thinking about how do we create markets for these higher value products, I mean, maybe I should push that back and say, what are we going to do about wool as the starting point?
100. Very true. Very true. Right. So if we sort of move on again, so like you say, we can probably do a whole podcast just on those different things. But whether you're in Shetland, doing scallops, or in Somerset cheddar, there's a strong regional identity to both fishing and farming communities. I think there's a lot of overlap between them. For a big part, still strong family businesses. You've got some of the big corporates, but also the strong families. How do we, I guess, learn from each other and making sure that those communities can thrive, that and working together within those communities and across the communities? How do we learn from each other and to make those thrive?
Yeah. I wish I had all the answers for all the questions, but I can only throw some tidbits out, if you like. I think something that we've been quite bad at in both farming and fishing, shall we say in food generally, in food production, is kind of looking after our producer reputation and brand between the headlights, or the headlines rather. So, in the world of fishing and seafood, we get these headlines, these just trying to think of the right word, but we get
like bad press. We do get a lot of bad press in both industries, I think.
Yes.
So
the reason I don't use that term is because we're already judging it as bad press. Now, is it bad press or is it true, right? That has to be our first question. It's very easy just to say, well, I don't like that headline, therefore it's bad press. But actually, there's very rarely any smoke without fire. Yeah, that was the right way around. And so we have to think, well, where has that come from? What's the truth in there? What's the origination? So that's why I just try to avoid terms like bad press, because there's always some truth in there somewhere along the line. However, really establishing what that truth is, but in between that bad press that we'll go with now, but those alarmist headlines, that really make people scared. And we do very little to kind of manage our reputation and to build any resilience in our own headlines in between. And I think that's something that we really need to look at doing better. And so when I was thinking about that, I thought, well, who do people listen to? Who do they trust? And if I think about farming, actually, and I'm sure that there are people, and they'll be on this podcast, who'll disagree with me here, but someone who has done a lot from a public perspective for farming is Jeremy Clarkson, right? Because you had this slightly likable rogue character. And he does a lot for farming in terms of public liking farmers better, understanding some of their situations better, whatever those things are. I'm sure there's plenty of resistance to that as well. But in fishing, we haven't managed to find any of that. The UK public do have a very odd relationship with fishing, because we love to watch a fishing program. So do you remember Trawler Man, when that used to be on? Right. And then there was another one recently where we went on many different types of vessels catching fish commercially around the UK. And at the end, we would tell you how much fish it had caught, the value of that fish, how much the crew got paid. I mean, it was quite extraordinary. On many levels. I thoroughly enjoyed watching it for obvious reasons. And then we have, people going out and seeing whether they could be a fisherman because it's such a dangerous pastime, all these kind of things. But then we'll get one headline and all fishermen are very bad people, destroying the ocean and destroying the planet. And it's really hard for us to maintain that and balance it. So I think that we have to think hard about doing that. And there are some very small examples. No, they're not small in terms of their activity. They're small in the sense that they can't resolve all of this overnight. But, 1,000 paper cuts, 1,000 butterflies flapping their wings, all those things, that's what creates change. And so I draw your attention to a fantastic two groups down in Cornwall. Young Farmers and Young Fishers networks down in Cornwall.
Fantastic.
Do you know them?
No,
not the Young Fishers, no.
Well, you should get them on. Talk about future leaders. You should definitely get them on here. Our Matilda, she's a model. So I obviously know the Young Fishers better, but these are super smart young people. And by that, I don't mean that they have endless degrees and all the rest of it. I mean, they're just intellectually super smart. They are, in the case of the Young Fishers, fishermen, or Matilda. I mean, honestly, fisher women don't mind being called fishermen. We haven't got our knickers in a twist about these things. So fisher people, and they want to be able to continue to fish, and they want to be able to be proud of Cornwall and doing that really well, and to influence government and things like that to allow them to continue to do that better. And I think that I am so grateful and enthused that these pockets of young people exist to help share their story in the most smart way. Matilda and some Cornish fishermen recently went to the UN Ocean Conference in Nice a few weeks ago. They were part of a round table that FAO put on. And they were there with a lot of young fishers from around the world, and they walked away and they're collectively creating asks to governments from young fishers.
Wow.
Now that's at a political level, and at a more kind of public level. They're in Cornwall being young fishermen, huge tourist part of the world. Right now they'll be super busy. Thank God for those young leaders coming through, and maybe that's a focus for the podcast is some of these young leaders. So young leaders, I think better education in schools around systems. People always say about where our food comes from, but I think it's bigger than that. It's about back to that stewardship, about systems, about the interconnectivity, the role of that in health, even the kind of the 9 meals from anarchy piece. I think that's all got to come into schools. And of course, we need some bold leadership at government levels and across the world. And sometimes we don't always like that. You mentioned seatbelts. I always use the smoking ban as because I still think it was incredible how the smoking ban came in, and the lobby behind that are pro-smoking are super rich and super powerful and super smart.
And Melanie, on that side, the ecosystem behind UFP, ultra processed foods, are super rich. In the hope that we see the diminishing of that through taxation or whatever. Are you excited, as we are? Are you excited for the fish sector that hopefully people, instead of eating pizzas, will be eating Cornish mackerel from Matilda?
Well, I'd love them to be eating Cornish mackerel from Matilda. Other mackerel is available. And in fact, our current CEO of CEFAS, which is our industry authority body, CEFAS, put up a slide recently that showed the consumption of animal proteins in the UK. And actually more fish was being eaten than I expected at that point, although I have some questions about that. But of the meat side of it, something like half of that pie chart, and I like the fact that I used the word pie, but processed meats like sausage and bacon and burgers and things like that. And I think, when we come that full circle back to people being connected into these systems and into these food systems and understanding where food comes from, what good food looks like, what it does for your health and your body, its impact on NHS, I've mentioned the health thing, all of that. Maybe if we can shift back to understanding all of that better, then people will eat more of Matilda's mackerel.
Yeah,
I do feel.
I said it feels like there's a real interesting symbiotic relationship between Melanie's sector and our sector, because we're all growing great food that's going to do good. Sorry, Isaac, over to you.
As if though by chance, and we managed to land on the two. It's almost as though we planned it, Max. Now, I was going to say, and I do believe there is, your thing about 1,000 butterflies. I do think there is a movement towards that better, more healthy, and more aware of where your food come. Maybe eating less protein, but it's in better protein, more healthy protein. So I think that is something. I do feel there's hope for the future, and in our young people, and they will, sort out the mess that's the older generation maybe have left them with. So, so I do, so I'm very hopeful on that. And I think, so on your things, and those young leaders, we need to help them develop, and there's the Matildas, but and who's following in their footsteps. We need to get that pipeline of young leaders in both industries coming through. I think that's an important thing that we should in all industries focus on more, and getting, it's not once you're at the top and then kind of look at leadership. It's that conveyor belt of leaders coming through, and at each level making that change. Something I'm quite passionate about.
I said, Melanie, do you remember back in the, dating myself, in the sort of the 70s and 80s when being a chef wasn't at all fashionable, and then the TV series has started to come in, and then everyone wanted to be a chef. And you mentioned our mercurial Jeremy Clarkson, and he and his cohorts, the likes of Caleb, are really pushing, getting people excited. I'm really excited about Matilda, about meeting Matilda. I've just got this vision of her.
I'm looking forward to introducing you.
but again, it's so easy to promote these people or for them to promote themselves. So rather than, I'm always picking on accountants, Melanie. There's nothing wrong with accountants, but instead of a younger individual becoming an accountant, they could become a young Caleb on a farm, or they could become a Matilda and do good. Yeah. No offense to accountants.
And the lovely thing is also that so we need people to go to, I'm very honoured to be an honorary professor at Heriot-Watt University, and I see these incredible smart minds, and they're tackling, the science of these things. They're looking at, how do we improve the gear that we catch fish with? We talked about AI, and there's an amazing trawl gate that goes in the net. So about shedding sheep, they're coming down the race at 1,000,000 miles an hour if your dog's doing a good job, and you're desperately trying to open and shut the gate fast enough to let the right ones through, right? And we have the same with fish now, but we're getting AI, to read what those fish are that are coming through and try and let out the ones that we don't want and things like that. We need that science and research in universities to be feeding into the industry. But what I love about Matilda and her team, they are equally as smart and articulate and fabulous, but they're out there on the water, right? One of the young fishermen who I've heard speak publicly, so, you know, we've got our net zero challenges from government and to, you know, reduce the emissions from fishing vessels and all these kind of things. And there was, if I remember the story rightly, there was an incentive to put batteries onto smaller boats. And he worked out that if he put this battery on his boat, it would sink. Right?
Oh no.
It's just this wonderful, he tells the story clearly so much better, but this wonderful disconnect between ambition and policy and reality on the water. And so we need people like Matilda and all of her colleagues. And as I say, they're working with the Young Farmers Network in Cornwall as well, but to be sharing their stories and their experience and their ideas, right? Because they have great ideas.
Yeah. So there's a great saying that shoes on the carpet shouldn't tell boots in the mud what to do. And I heard in Canada, because otherwise your boat will sink in this case. Wow. So,
and you know, we started out talking about stewardship, and these are the next stewards, right? So there's a lot of really, I defend anyone working in farming and fishing and aquaculture who are trying to do it well. And do you know what, that might mean that they make mistakes, and it might mean that things happen because they do, and all those kind of things, because we've all experienced it, we've all been there. And I will defend everybody in that space. And it, you know, I've even wrestled with being vegetarian sometimes, because even though I used to take the sheep to the abattoir and all the rest of it, I think, oh, I don't want to kill anything. But then I want to see the sheep in the fields and all. So I'm a very conflicted person, is what I'm saying. But I think that's a good place to be from where I am. But we're just acting as stewards through all of this, whether it's about our food system or our policies for food systems or the science that we find the money to do, because never forget that there's a whole load of things that we don't know because no one found enough money to find them out, right? And this new brigade that will come through, we just need to make sure that we leave it such that they have lots of options. You know, choices aren't taken away from them, that the stocks and the land and the nutrients and the topsoil and all those things are as good as we can hand over to that next steward incumbent.
Well, so what you just said.
Isaac, we nearly run out of 50p's for the meter. Over to you, Isaac.
Okay, so one last quick one, and then Melanie, is what you said there about about the sheep and the you thought about vegetarian. I think so. That's something that we should maybe think about as farming, and rather than having this us and them, is kind of show that as farmers, as fishermen, then there is this empathy to the product and the so that we produce, and then find that common ground with people across the aisle, and actually some help share that story and some help share that what we talk about, custodianship, about stewardship, about sustainabilities. And I think that is maybe a big key in unlocking the future.
And if I may say so, sometimes we're a bit combative over these things. So we know that there's been a big rise in vegetarianism and veganism, and we could debate that for a long time. However, if that's there, that doesn't mean to say that you have to stop farming sheep or pigs or chickens or whatever it is that you're doing well tomorrow. It just means that you have an opportunity to accommodate those people as well, right? So I think that we have to be adaptive to, consumers that are coming through, as well as, help with that sort of education of the role of all of these things in our systems and societies. You guys will know better than me even that sheep are the best grass managers you can possibly have in a field, right? And I don't expect a consumer to know that, but if I want to see sheep in a field, I'm probably going to have to eat them at some point. We have, Isaac will know, huge populations of deer in the southeast of England that have no natural predator other than cars and a few licensed shots. I eat a lot of venison because it suits my mentality. But I know a lot of people that won't eat it because they can't eat Bambi.
Yeah.
And there hangs another tale.
Wrap up us, Isaac.
Take it home, Isaac.
Wow, what a conversation. From me, thank you very much, Melanie, and really enjoyed that. Thank you to everybody that's listening in. Just as a reminder, and I work for AHDB. This is part of the Talking Leaders series. I think we're almost up to about 50 episodes now, Max. So go and have a look back there. And all kind of wonderful people like Melanie on there. Go and have a look at some of the other resources we've got for AgriLeader, but also wider AHDB. Thank you very much.
And guys, before we wrap up, you know what I've got to ask Melanie, if you and I were going to go immediately down to Isaac, and I was going to bring some Hawkston lager, and Isaac's going to have some South African red there, fish. It's a lovely summer's afternoon. What fish should we look to cook at Isaac's lovely backdrop? What would you recommend? What's the favourite fish that you'd like to have this summer year, please?
Like your favourite child.
Yeah. Oh, it is a little bit awkward, but hey. I do love barbecued mackerel. I mean, I love mackerel as a fish, and I think spatchcocking it and barbecuing it with a fabulous cold beer or cold wine and salad. I mean, what could be possibly better? We'll be round in about an hour, Isaac.
That's all right. I light the fire.
Fantastic. Melanie, if you could WhatsApp Matilda to organise that, coming in, that'd be fantastic.
I'd love to.
Team, thank you very much, Melanie. That's brilliant. I learned so much. Isaac, thank you very much.
Thank you, Max.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Yes, bye.